Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Narisi Murray and in today's video we're going to have a book club where we chat about my cousin brother, which I wrote and published in October 2021, and it's been a year and a bit. And thank you to everyone who's bought the book, who's read the book, who's given me feedback and who's just been so supportive. So thank you to everyone. And I really appreciate all the kind words, the comments, the criticism, constructive and otherwise. It's just been good to have that engagement, not just on the book, but on all the issues that were touched on in the book, and just to have the conversation with people on thoughts that I was having and conversations that I was having with myself. So it's really good to have that open dialogue. So the purpose of this video is to have a book club where I just go through some of the comments and questions and feedback that I've gotten on the book. So thank you to everyone who's provided that, and let's kick off. So just as a background, I've had some wonderful discussions in the media, some media publications or radio, and even had the privilege of attending the Kingsmead Book Fair, where I had a panel discussion on Echoes of the Past, where we talked about literature that was set in South Africa during the apartheid era. And if you've read the book, you know that it was set during the 80s in Durban, Chatsworth, which is in South Africa. And during that time, South Africa was under the apartheid system, which was an oppressive political system that separated races, peoples, and gave different and often preferential and prejudicial treatment based on people's races. So it was in that context that the book was set, and in particular in an Indian community in Chatsworth. So in this particular setting, Indians were segregated and lived amongst their own people and had very limited contact with other racial groups. So as a result of that upbringing, people had very focused experiences on their own culture, their own upbringings, and their own society. So, that limited racial and social mixing really just gave people a deep focus and also a deep appreciation and support for their own particular background and upbringing and worldview. So it's in that backdrop that the character Pravania has her own coming of age awakening and coming of age political awakening. So in this book club, I will discuss issues, but I promise no spoilers. And and it's against this backdrop that the other characters also had their experiences, and I'll just touch on them briefly. But before I go any further into the story of the book, I'd like to just touch on a few comments. So a lot of people gave me feedback that they loved the description of the food in the book. So everyone in particular loved the description of scrambled eggs with chilies and onions, and that was a particular favorite of my dad and my mom and even myself growing up. I don't eat eggs anymore, but just some background in terms of the Durban Chatsworth palate was that it was kind of trained to appreciate chilies and strong flavors. So where you would have breakfast, you would still toss in a bit of chilies, and not just with scrambled eggs, but also with baked beans. So baked beans with onions and chilies is one of my favorite breakfast foods. So it doesn't matter whether you're having breakfast, lunch, or supper, you're going to have a bit of onion and chili in all your food, and that's what makes it so much more satisfying and delicious. So if you appreciate or have a Durban South Indian in particular palate, you're going to appreciate just putting some green chilies and everything. Obviously, the North Indians do it as well, but I know my Pakistani friends, they like to have more cream than chili in their food. So so we like the chilies in everything. And I think that was one of the biggest comments that I received, that when people were reading about like how Pravania's dad was having scrambled eggs with onions and chilies for breakfast, that just took them back to their youth. where they would have that, you know, especially on the weekends. I mean, that was a firm favorite. And just that aroma just, you know, triggered people's memories and transported them back in time to their own childhood, or even just that own experience in the 80s. And, you know, it even encouraged and inspired people to have some scrambled eggs and green chilies right then and there. And I know I really enjoy the baked beans and chilies. So, you know, that for some reason was the most popular comment on the book. So, you know, try it. Another comment on the book that, you know, I received abundantly was people loved the use of the word mineral. So some background, mineral is just an abbreviation of the word mineral water. So back in the day, people used to call cool drinks or soft drinks a mineral, and it was, you know, initially made from actual, you know, minerals. Like you have minerals naturally occurring in water, but you know these were added into water, and also gas was added in to amplify the flavor. And now we have colorants and flavorants and you know, a variety of flavors. But back in the day, it was purely mineral water, and that was called mineral. And you know, people in Durban to this day often refer to cool drinks and soft drinks as mineral. And like when you move out of Durban, you can't really say that anymore because no one knows what you're talking about. If you go into a restaurant and you order mineral, people would think that you are like, you know, speaking a foreign language. So you have to kind of adapt and say, okay, I would like this cool drink, etc., etc. But like deep down, you know, it's mineral. So, you know, people really enjoyed that. So, you know, go if you feel like saying mineral in Durban, maybe now people will know what you're talking about. Even out of Durban, people will know what you're talking about. So, you know, just enjoy the word. And, you know, that kind of sparked further conversations into other words that people just used, and I thought everyone knew what it meant. So in Durban and Chatsworth in particular, we spoke about felt-tipped pens. So it was only when I started having friends from other racial groups that I learned the word kokies. And I had no idea what a koki was until I saw people using a felt-tip pen. And I was like, that's a felt-tip pen. And it's very self-explanatory what a felt-tip pen was. But like a koki is just something completely different in my mind. I don't even know what language it is, maybe Afrikaans. But koki was a South African, you know, word for felt-tip pen that other people use, and maybe still use towards, I mean, in this day. But you know, as I moved out of Durban and you know into other areas of South Africa, Cape Town, Joburg, you know, people use felt-tip pens. So I mean, I just thought I'd raise that because people also talked about that, and it just seemed like you know, a revival of the word koki to them. And also on koki, the word stokie came up, and I had no idea what stokie was until I made friends from other racial groups. And stokies are another word for warm slippers. So again, yes, you know, people just became you know, inspired to start using the word stokie again. So enjoy that as well. So another comment that people really made to me was that when they read the book, it really brought back memories of their own activism during the apartheid era. So often a lot of the readers were young and in school, primary school, high school, during the 80s. And one of the popular methods of protest and activism was a sit-in, where you went to school and you didn't attend your lessons. You would either go into the courtyard and sit in a circle and basically boycott the class, or you would go into the school grounds and you would sit in the ground. Maybe you would sing, maybe you would protest, a little bit of toy-toying, dancing, but not so much from the people who gave me their feedback. But a lot of quiet, peaceful protesting during school hours. And they reflected that, you know, sometimes, you know, this, you know, impacted negatively on their studies, but they felt very passionate about furthering the movement towards liberation, so that they were prepared to make the sacrifice. And at other times, their parents intervened and said, we're not sending you school to be an activist, go back to class. And they would have to go back and be one of the 5 children in the classroom attending their lessons while the rest of their peer group was in the courtyard protesting. So, they were, a lot of these comments came through of memories of activism, and then just this feelings of, wow, it was a time of uncertainty, a time of, where is our future? What can we do to create a future of a free South Africa, a democratic South Africa? Will it be achieved by these sit-ins, these protests? And, we had some interesting conversations, and I think people really appreciated their actions and appreciated the time. And just, even though they felt that, they were in school and maybe very young, they still had an impact on the liberation struggle by their actions, however small they were or localized they felt that it really did. And, of course it did. It created an energy, a momentum of change, and that had huge waves and ripples forward in the liberation struggle. So I really enjoyed those conversations. Another comment that came through was on the other side of the liberation struggle. People reflected on run-ins that they had with the security police, or police or informants, or people within their own community or racial group that worked for the apartheid system. And I mean, this was a full spectrum of activity, to people who were informants or actively involved or actively spying on liberation activities. So they were, even though the people I spoke to weren't directly involved with being an informant or a spy themselves, they had run-ins with these people or knew of these people to a lesser extent and their activities. So I mean, that was an interesting reflection we had on the book. And not too much detail was shared. It was quite a sensitive topic, and maybe there was a discomfort about sharing too much. People didn't want to judge people too harshly, especially people who were involved in the political system, in the apartheid government. People had family members or were actively involved themselves in the apartheid system, and their experience or reflections were that they had to participate to get things done. If there was no representation for their racial group in the relevant system of government or tier government, in even the apartheid system, then whatever little they could achieve for their people just wouldn't happen. So they would rather be in the system than outside of the system. And there's no judgment. I think the past was a different country. You can't really understand people's experiences unless you were there and really experienced it for themselves. So it's just really valuable just to hear these stories and hear these reflections. And of course, I mean, there were people who participated for their own opportunistic self-improvement. And again, there's no judgment. I think, people did what they had to for their own families, and the past was a different country again. So, I mean, that really came through. And I think, even those who participated in the political system from an apartheid point of view also are happy that we moved forward from that, and now that we have some aspects of a democracy. I wouldn't go so far as to say, we have a fully fledged 100% democracy. I mean, I think we've basically seen and experienced the gaps in our political system where, democratic processes and aspects should have been present, but were not and are not and need to be amplified. So, we're on a journey and spectrum, and I think just a reflection on, writing this book and living in South Africa is that we still have a lot of work to do in our democratic system. I don't think democracy in of itself is a failure as a system. I think we just need to, not just, we definitely need to amplify our efforts into enhancing the failures or shortcomings in our democratic system. They have been identified by many journalists, judges, political commentators, and there's definitely work to be done into plugging in those gaps, closing those holes, and just remedying the shortcomings that we've seen and experienced. So it's a journey, folks, and I think writing this book and living in South Africa, what it's basically helped me come to realize, it's that you can never really say we've stopped being a political participant or an activist. There's always work to be done. The characters in the book, they were in the process of starting it, changing the old and birthing the new. The people who have read this book and who've had those experiences, they were participants in ending the old and birthing the new, and paving the way, brick by brick of democracy. And unfortunately, we would hope that it's the roof was on, but it's not. So yeah, there's work to be done. But let me not digress too much, and get back to some of the really poignant feedback that we've received. I've received on the book. I think one of the things that the dialogue I've had with readers has highlighted to me is that as a South African people and society, we are very resilient. Growing up during apartheid, if you were one of the racial groups that was not preferred in terms of legislation and the apartheid system, you really had to work hard and be resilient and try and build your own life. You couldn't rely on the government. In fact, the government was trying to limit you, and you had to rely on yourself and your family and your community to achieve what you needed to achieve. So you had to be resilient. I mean, there was no or very limited social security or a safety net or resources or structures to rely on. So it was very much relying on yourself, family, and the community to live and to make things happen and to move things forward. So that is resilience, and I think we still have it in us. And as a child who was very young in the 80s and came of age in the 90s, I mean, I think maybe at that point there could have been a justifiable expectation to have that reliance on the government. But the lived experience is that we still very much have to be resilient, but also have that resilience with us. And it's been still developed and still tested and is still growing. So it's not a bad thing to be resilient. Obviously, we would like to be comfortable and rely on others and the government, but we can rely on ourselves and our community, family, society. So it's not that we have nothing, we have a lot. And that's been highlighted to me in these conversations. And also, one of the things that's really come through in discussion and also reflections was that we have the ability to affect change. So during apartheid, and especially with young people, during that time, they may not have had a lot of resources, but they had the energy, the motivation, the inspiration, the passion, and the willpower, and also the self-confidence to believe that they could affect change, and they did it. So these were not people with the weight of state apparatus, the military, funds, all those resources behind them. They had very little. However, they kind of grouped together and effected change. So these were people who did big things with very little. And these are not people who are in some faraway place or some abstract product of imagination. These are real people who live amongst us. These are our neighbors and our parents, grandparents, relatives, people who lived during those times and did things to make big changes, and it happened. And we haven't lost those people. Well, not all of them. We have many. We are lucky to have many of them still amongst us, and we can draw upon them to basically have the inspiration and insight to effect change. So, like building democracy, change is part of that, and an ongoing process. So, yep, and I think it's highlighted that people with very little can make big things happen. So it's not a theoretical thing, and it's still happening, and that was quite inspiring, and just meeting people who did that was always also inspiring to me. But let's just move on to the next comment, which was, and this is related to kind of the other aspects of the discussion, was that it's people and not governments that gets things done. And during the times of the apartheid experience, where marginalized groups couldn't rely on the government to get things done, they had to build, or contribute heavily towards the building of their own schools, hospitals, housing, basically things that were necessary for life, food, growing their own food. There were many things that they couldn't rely on the government for. They could only rely on themselves, their family, and their community system, and they could get things done. So it highlighted that people, even though they had basics in place, some of them had basics, some of them didn't, they could get a lot done. And we would have hoped that we wouldn't have to work so hard, or we could have been taken care of a bit more, and that the resources of the state would be used to uplift us more. However, that's not the case. But it's also just highlighting to us that we don't need the government. Obviously, it would be great to have the government, and personally, I'm in favor of small government. I'm not an anarchist, so I'm not saying the government is rubbish or has no place. I'm saying that people are more powerful than the government and can do bigger and better things than the government. Believe it or not, even though the government has all these resources and power and seems like they are this giant behemoth, it's actually the people who can do more and who keep the wheels turning and keep society going. And I think we definitely see this now, where we see people making things happen for themselves, and I think that's something that is inspiring, and that's something we can draw hope and motivation from. And that's come through in a lot of the discussions that back in the day we did it, and we would have liked to, not do it. Hope things would have been better, but we still can do it. So that was inspiring. And a comment that I received from my international readers, interesting, not so much my South African readers, but maybe because there was more things to speak about from South African's point of view, but from the international readers, they really enjoyed the love story, and they really enjoyed, the kind of test of love, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but that was something that they enjoyed, and I'll just leave it to there, and leave it to readers to find out for themselves. For a lot of readers, they really also enjoyed being represented and having their childhood and cultural experience and worldview and upbringing represented in literature. And many people have moved forward from their background and upbringing in Durban, and they've gone all over the world and all over South Africa. And just to be reminded of that period in time and time of their life was not just nostalgic, but also deeply warm and inspiring, and just felt really people felt really affirmed and recognized, and just felt really hopeful, and I think validated. And it's not that people need literature or these things to feel validated, but when you finally have your own experiences published and shared with the world, and in a book, it just becomes so real and it makes you feel proud. So I think people just felt proud that their own background and experience and upbringing was represented finally in a book, and that just made them feel happy. So whenever they needed to be reminded of aspects of their childhood or upbringing, they would go to the book, and that just made them feel happy again, and took them back to that time and place in their lives. And it was very fulfilling to a lot of readers. So that also made me happy, and it also took me back and gave me that same feeling, because I mean, I also had a similar upbringing and a similar experience. So happy to relive that with my readers. Another comment that people touched on, and maybe not so much, but was on just the patriarchal time, and we still have many aspects of the patriarchal structure still in our society, and we've come a long way, and we've recognized the negative aspects of the patriarchal system. But in the 80s, it was still very firmly entrenched, and we hadn't moved as far as we have now. So it just also highlighted to people aspects of the patriarchal system that were in place and that we've moved forward from, but also aspects of the patriarchal system that were still in place. And the character in the book, she's a young female, and she feels limitations because she's a young female. She doesn't have the same freedom of movement that her male family members have, even those who are younger and less responsible than she is. She doesn't have the same resources that her male family members have. And I think this was a point that people felt we've moved forward from, that, for example, in the book, where the brother was given more resources to study, etc., than the females. They were just, well, not all of them, but many were expected to just get married and start their own family and move forward, while the husband was expected to be the breadwinner and thus needed resources to uplift himself. And that included further education, and that equal opportunity was not provided to the female members of the family. And many people, happily so, felt that we moved forward from that, and I hope that we have substantially, if not fully, moved forward from that thinking. The aspect of patriarchy that we haven't really moved forward from was the limitation on movement and freedom. And I understand, and I'm very real to the reason of this is that at present in South Africa there are very real risks of violence, especially gender-based violence towards females, and that many parents are worried that their female family members, especially their younger daughters, would be subjected to violence and are not safe, or as safe as their male members of the family. And this is one of the reasons or justifications for limiting freedom of movement. And I mean, this was a particular irritation of mine growing up, was that I, especially in high school, felt that I was quite responsible and was not going to do anything silly or harmful to myself or others, but I didn't really, have a lot of freedom to go out and party or go on weekend trips, or, just go out in the evenings with my friends, whereas my brother was. And, it's not to say that he wasn't responsible, but, I was responsible, and so were my sisters. And if not the same level of responsible, definitely more responsible. So why was the different treatment? And I understand the real dangers that present themselves to women living in South Africa. And I think this would just be a call to action to say, how can we how can we achieve the same amount of experiences for our female family members and not limit them, and keep them safe at the same time, and maybe plant the seeds and nurture the seeds of care and love and safety and respect towards women and family members and plant these seeds in our sons and daughters. And I know that we can only plant the seeds and nurture them, and children will do their own thing, especially as they grow up. But you know, if we can do our best to raise sons, and this is coming from a mother of a son as well, who respect and who will treat women with respect and not see women as an object that they can overpower or bully or subjugate, then we can just move society forward in terms of this aspect of patriarchy. And I think the risk of limiting women in this level of movement and freedom is that if you don't have the same experiences, you don't have the same opportunities, you can't go out and become a little bit more streetwise. You still remain very naive. And if you are naive, then you are still at risk. Even if you're then 18, 20, 25, and you go out into the working world and you haven't been exposed at a younger age to the dangers, or not even dangers, just the issues in the world, you are more at risk. So it's just a call to action to see how we can give women, young girls, just that freedom of movement and experience while keeping them safe. So that was a very interesting point, and I've had these discussions with readers, and yeah, it is an ongoing discussion, and I think it's something that will hopefully get better as society evolves. Another issue that was discussed in the book and that came out in conversations was on colorism, and how in the book that the darker skinned characters were not treated as favorably or regarded as pretty or beautiful, while the lighter skinned characters did get more privileges and did get regarded as being better looking and more attractive, not by virtue of their being or their energy or even their facial features or other bodily features, according to standards of beauty at that time, but according to mainly just the color of their skin. And colorism, is a product of not only the apartheid system of racial preference and prejudice, but also broadly into caste, where in the Indian caste system, the lighter skinned people were regarded as high caste, and often the lighter skinned people were high caste, and the darker skinned people were regarded as low caste. And they were low caste more often than not because they worked labor jobs in the fields and out in the sun and became darker as a result of their manual labor in the outdoors, while the lighter high caste people didn't have to do that or didn't necessarily have those jobs, and thus didn't become as sunburned. So there is that cultural baggage of caste and how it plays out in colorism, and that followed many Indians to South Africa subconsciously, maybe not consciously, and that was amplified by the apartheid system and that thinking. And I think we have really moved forward as a society in terms of colorism, and this is not something that's unique to the Indian experience or to Indian people in South Africa or anywhere in the world. Colorism is experienced by the colored population in South Africa, by the Black population in South Africa, and indeed by all racial groups across the world. It's very interesting to see how prevalent colorism is, especially in the media. And I've traveled quite a bit, in societies in Asia, for example, where there are, and believe it or not, in many Asian societies, there are people of a variety of hues of skin color, to light brown, to darker brown, to almost white, to yellowish. And there is a strong variation, but you would never see it being represented in the media. It was very monotone in terms of the lighter skin representation in the media. And this is not, to be harsh to my Asian viewers or peoples. It's just an observation that I was quite surprised to see that, colorism is just not an Indian issue. It's a much broader issue, and it's not just a South African issue. It's a very much a global issue. So I mean, that was highlighted to me, not just in terms of my own experience, my own observations, but also in conversations. And the psychology of pretty privilege, that is where subconsciously people who are viewed as more attractive are given better treatment than people who are viewed as less attractive by the prevailing norms of beauty standards in that time in society, is a very real thing. And one of the aspects of pretty privilege that is visited in terms of colorism is that, people who are lighter skinned have experienced better treatment than people who are darker skinned, not just from an apartheid 1980s point of view, but to a lesser extent today. And I think once you're aware of an issue, you are more empowered to then make better decisions. And this is not a judgment, it's just an observation that this is something that's planted in our subconscious, especially if you had that experience of growing up in the 80s where you were brainwashed by the apartheid system and the racial preferences and prejudices at that time, by the media. I mean, I grew up in the 1980s watching 3 television channels, and it was mainly white people and the odd African American sitcom where there were Black people being represented, but that was not the norm, and subconsciously that does impact you. And throughout my life, I've just tried to recognize and heal and move forward from those prejudices. So, just documenting that and highlighting that and having those conversations with people has also made it real to me that this is still here to a lesser extent, but I think it's worth discussing. And thank you to people who've discussed this with me and raised it with me. I appreciate those honest discussions. And I think to maybe then round off the video, I'd like to kind of just raise that this is a coming of age story, or the book is a coming of age story. And, one of the things that came through with readers, and it came through in the comments, and it also came through with myself, was that when you're a young person, and even if you are experiencing challenges, I think there'll be challenges in any age, in any society, in any time. But the challenges of that time, especially in apartheid South Africa, just seem so restrictive. But young people still felt hopeful. And when they were coming of age, they didn't say, I'm turning 18 and, I'm not going to be able to go to university because I'm poor and I'm the wrong skin color. And, socioeconomic status didn't really come through in the comments, but I will raise it because I think it wasn't seen as a limiting factor because everyone had the same experience. Many of the people that I spoke to didn't really come from superbly wealthy backgrounds, so there was a very similar economic status amongst the people I spoke to, and especially the characters in the book. But there wasn't this feeling of limitation because of it. Rather, there was a feeling of, I'm turning 18 and I have my future and I have the rest of my life ahead of me, and I have all this purpose and I have so much to live for that I'm going to make the effort, or I'm going to do everything in my power to make the best life for myself. And if that means overcoming the obstacles presented by a restrictive society like the apartheid system at that time, or other restrictions, there was an enthusiasm and a will to do so. And many of the readers who were youthful or younger in that time, that is the 1980s, they really felt that motivation and enthusiasm and coming of age, excitement rekindled with them. And as you get older, it's not that you face fewer challenges, and of course you become more mature and you become more worldly and you have more tools and more experience to deal with challenges. But what you lacked in experience, maturity, resources, etc. when you're younger, you made up for it in terms of inspiration and excitement and just that passion to move forward and build your own future. And I don't think that needs to be lost as you get older. And like the challenges of life can make you tired and wear you down, and dare I say, can make a few of us feel a bit jaded. I think that's not necessary. It doesn't have to be so. And a lot of what came through is that inspiration of coming of age, of feeling young, is something that can be carried through, and that you can come of age at any age. You can come of age from youth to adult. You can come of age from young adult to mature adult to parent to entrepreneur to whatever, from 30s to 40s, 40s to 50s, 50s to 60s, retirement. I mean, parent to grandparent. There's so much in life and the future to look forward to, and I think it's always just helpful to be reminded of your youth, or be reminded of a feeling or inspiration or something that gives you that same excitement and hope and motivation to build a future and life for yourself, and that life doesn't have to end, or rather that excitement or purpose doesn't have to end at any point in your life. There's always purpose and excitement to have or to look forward to, and then to kind of leverage on that and be as excited and hopeful as you were in your teens and 20s at any point in your life. So that was quite nice to draw upon, and thank you to readers who gave me this wonderful feedback, and I'm so grateful for all the love and support and amazing comments and amazing feedback that was given to me and shared. I'm also grateful to share that with my viewers today, and thank you for this time and for this opportunity to have this book club discussion. I'm a reader. I'm a reader because I read. I'm a writer because I write. But I feel like I'm an author because people read my work and people give me this feedback and give me so much wonderful emotion and feedback and energy, and that just means the world to me. So thank you so much, and I hope to have more book club discussions. So the book is My Cousin Brother. It's available on Kindle. You can email me if you'd also like a copy of the book. If you have more questions, please put them in the comments below, and we can have more conversations on the book, more book clubs. And I hope to chat soon to you more, if not on YouTube, then in person or in other aspects of the media. But have a beautiful day, friends, and thank you for sharing this time with me. Bye.